The parents of a boy who died after being given contaminated blood more than 30 years ago have spoken today for the first time about his death, how it ruined his life and their fight for truth. Lee Turton contracted HIV and hepatitis as a result of what's being called the biggest scandal in the NHS's history. His parents today gave evidence at the inquiry into how so many people were given infected blood in the 1970s and 1980s. Ivor Bennett has their story.
Good morning, son. Merry Christmas to you.
This was Lee Turton the Christmas before he died. Complaining of a stomachache and being unable to sleep. For over half his life, the 10-year-old had been fighting infections he should never have contracted.
I couldn't get to sleep.
Just 1 month after this was filmed, he would finally succumb.
He should be here, and if he didn't receive contaminated blood, he'd still be here today.
Nearly 30 years on, the loss felt by Lee's parents is as raw as ever, matched only by their anger.
We can't move on, and we need to know the truth. The truth needs to come out now. The public need to know the truth as well, of how it was all covered up.
Lee was diagnosed with haemophilia when he was 6 months old. His treatment involved a blood product called Factor VIII, but its contamination infected him with hepatitis C and HIV when he was 4, the remainder of his life an ever greater struggle.
He felt different when he was in school because people started talking and children started talking. Friends wouldn't play with him anymore, so he started to realise he was different from anybody else.
Ostracised at school, Lee's family moved to Cornwall to protect his childhood, but it was one that was ultimately cut short through no fault of his own, and now his parents want justice. Ivor Bennett, ITV News.
Juliet Bremner joins us now from the inquiry in central London where Colin Turton and his wife Denise gave evidence there this morning. They haven't spoken out until now. What made them decide to do it at this stage?
Well, quite simply prejudice. It is almost 30 years, but as you saw in that film, people back in the 1980s and 90s saw HIV and AIDS as a death sentence. Indeed, it was just 4 weeks after that video that you were seeing took place that Lee died. He was just 10 years old, and talking about it was obviously extremely emotional and difficult for his parents. His mother described to the inquiry his last few days.
We got back to Cornwall, they actually told us he had between, we called us in, didn't they?
Yeah.
2 and 10 days to live. Sorry. So he said he had an infection on the brain. So we insisted that he went home that day because that's what he wanted to do. He kept asking to go home.
Yeah, and afterwards I spoke to them outside and they were clearly still quite shaken by what they'd experienced, having to give that evidence. But they said it was, the reason they'd done it was because they were determined that the government should be held accountable. They want them to accept liability. So many people, like them, feel that over the years the authorities have avoided responsibility for what happened.
What are we expecting in the final few weeks of it?
Well, it will go on for a long time still. We've got another few weeks of personal testimony, and then we're going to move on to listen to experts and finally those held responsible. And so it's going to be possibly another year before there are any conclusion, any results from this.
Yeah, Bremner, thank you.